America faces economic and ideological challenges. The global landscape is experiencing turbulence, with major economies like China, Germany, and the United States grappling with financial distress. These challenging times highlight the ongoing ideological battle between Marxism and capitalism, a tension evident throughout history. The Marxist influence in education and policy. In 1965, at just 17, my economics teacher had us delve into Marx's The Communist Manifesto. This approach starkly contrasted with traditional teachings of Keynesian and other economic theories. I quickly realized how Marxism, while often unacknowledged, permeates many educational institutions and societal frameworks. Key tenets of Marxism abolishing private property, uniting workers globally, and advocating for a progressive income tax remain influential. Consider today's teachers' unions, the largest in the U.S., which often align with these ideals. Their dominance has sidelined financial education in schools, leaving students unequipped to navigate the modern economy. Financial systems under pressure. Historically, the United States prided itself on limited taxation, epitomized by the Boston Tea Party of 1773. However, the rise of powerful banking institutions has shifted the dynamic. These entities wield immense influence over global finance and politics, creating systemic vulnerabilities. For instance, the Federal Reserve is not a government entity, but a cartel of private banks controlling monetary policy. In the face of economic uncertainty, I advocate for personal financial literacy. Unlike traditional education, which focuses on rote learning, practical lessons like understanding assets, liabilities, and leveraging debt equip individuals to thrive. My journey in real estate and investing exemplifies this approach. By mastering skills such as sales and real estate strategies, I achieved financial independence. Cryptocurrencies, the people's money. The advent of cryptocurrencies, particularly Bitcoin, offers a counterpoint to centralized financial systems. While traditional banks and governments may seek to co-opt blockchain technology for surveillance, decentralized currencies provide individuals with a degree of financial autonomy. Gold and silver remain steadfast as tangible assets, but Bitcoin's growth underscores a shift toward digital alternatives. A divided nation, America's political landscape reflects deep divisions. Policy decisions, such as halting the Keystone Pipeline and opening borders, exacerbate socioeconomic disparities. These actions, perceived by some as fostering division, lay the groundwork for unrest. History teaches that economic crises often lead to war or authoritarian regimes, as seen with Germany in the 1930s. Today's challenges demand proactive preparation. Whether through investing in tangible assets or diversifying portfolios with cryptocurrencies, individuals must take charge of their financial futures. Governments may falter, but self-reliance and education are tools to weather the storm. The path forward. As economic pressures mount globally, collaboration and resilience are crucial. Institutions and individuals alike must prioritize transparency and accountability. Most importantly, fostering financial literacy will empower people to navigate complexities, ensuring they're not merely at the mercy of larger systems. Let us learn from history, adapt to current challenges, and equip ourselves for the future. The unintended consequences of U.S. foreign policy. A shifting global power dynamic. For decades, the United States has operated under the assumption of its unassailable dominance, a legacy of its post-World War II economic and military supremacy. However, as the world shifts and evolves, the very strategies designed to maintain this dominance may now be accelerating its decline. The case of sanctions against Russia and the evolving role of BRICS nations illustrate the profound and often unintended consequences of American foreign policy. Sanctions that strengthened the target. When the U.S. and its allies imposed sanctions on Russia following its invasion of Ukraine, The goal was clear: weaken Moscow's economic and political influence. Yet, rather than isolating Russia, these measures inadvertently catalyzed closer cooperation among the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. The sanctions disrupted Europe's reliance on cheap Russian energy, driving up production costs and diminishing the competitiveness of European exports. Meanwhile, Russia redirected its oil and gas exports to its BRICS partners, particularly India and China. These nations not only absorbed the surplus, but also bolstered their economic interdependence with Russia. The result? A more coordinated and resilient BRICS bloc that challenges the traditional dominance of Western-led economic structures. A global shift in economic gravity. The emergence of BRICS as a formidable economic force underscores a broader global realignment. Together, these nations represent nearly half the world's population and an increasing share of global economic output. Growth rates in countries like India, 7%, and China, 4.8%, far outpace those of the United States, 2.8%, signaling a shift in the epicenter of global economic dynamism. Moreover, the diversification of trade partnerships and the gradual erosion of the dollar's dominance as the global reserve currency further highlight the waning influence of the U.S. central banks worldwide, now hold just 50% of their reserves in dollars, down from 80–90% 2 decades ago, a stark indicator of the changing financial order. The cost of denial. Despite these unmistakable trends, much of American policy and rhetoric remains anchored in a Cold War-era mindset. This refusal to acknowledge the rise of alternative power centers not only hinders effective policymaking, but also exacerbates the very challenges the U.S. seeks to overcome. Consider the unwavering support for Israel in its conflict with Palestine. While the U.S. continues to back Israel almost unconditionally, 146 of the 195 UN member states now recognize Palestine as a state. Recent moves by NATO allies like Spain, Norway, and Ireland to recognize Palestine signal a growing divergence from U.S. policy, reflecting broader global shifts in sentiment. Learning from history, empires throughout history, from the British to the Romans, have faced the inevitable challenge of decline. What distinguishes successful transitions from disastrous collapses is the willingness to adapt, to recognize the limitations of unilateral dominance, and to forge collaborative pathways forward. The United States, too, must navigate this moment with humility and foresight. The rise of BRICS, the growing influence of China, and the deepening interdependence of emerging economies are not threats to be countered, but realities to be engaged with. The question is whether the U.S. can transition from a posture of dominance to one of partnership, embracing a multipolar world where its influence is shared rather than imposed. A path forward. Acknowledging the decline of unilateral dominance is not an admission of defeat, but an opportunity for renewal. By investing in diplomacy, fostering mutual economic growth, and addressing global challenges collaboratively, the United States can remain a vital and respected leader in an increasingly interconnected world. The alternative, clinging to an outdated vision of supremacy, risks further isolation and irrelevance. It is a choice that requires courage, pragmatism, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. But as history has shown, the ability to adapt is the hallmark of enduring strength. The global power shift, BRICS, and the decline of Western hegemony. In an era marked by rapid geopolitical and economic transformation, the ascent of the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, signals a profound shift in global dynamics. As these nations challenge the traditional dominance of the West, the implications for economic stability, political alliances, and global governance are immense. The crumbling pillars of Western dominance. The post-World War II economic order, established at Bretton Woods in 1944, enshrined the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. For decades, this system allowed the United States to exert outsized influence on global trade and finance. However, critics argue that this dominance has bred complacency and exploitation, with the U.S. increasingly reliant on bad money unbacked fiat currency to sustain its economy. The speaker in the transcript describes this reliance as toilet paper money, a stark critique of a system that has failed to adapt to the demands of a multipolar world. One of the key mechanisms of U.S. economic control has been the SWIFT payment system. By weaponizing this tool against adversaries, the U.S. has alienated many nations, accelerating efforts to establish alternatives. The BRICS coalition's pursuit of a new settlement currency, potentially backed by commodities like gold, underscores this growing resistance. Such moves aim to insulate member states from the volatility and coercion associated with the dollar-dominated system. BRICS, a coalition of the discontented BRICS, began as a coalition of emerging economies seeking to amplify their voices on the global stage. Over time, it has evolved into a broader alliance with over a dozen countries, including Saudi Arabia, Argentina, and Nigeria, expressing interest in joining. This expansion reflects widespread dissatisfaction with Western economic policies and a desire for a more equitable system of trade and governance. The transcript highlights the strategic initiatives underpinning BRICS cohesion, such as the Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO. These projects not only enhance infrastructure and trade connectivity, but also foster mutual dependence among member states, reducing their reliance on Western systems. For instance, the North-South transport corridor connecting Iran, Russia, and India exemplifies efforts to bypass U.S.-controlled maritime routes. Mexico and the Western Hemisphere, a new front. Among the potential BRICS aspirants, Mexico stands out due to its proximity to the U.S. and its economic significance in Latin America. The possibility of Mexico joining BRICS raises questions about the implications for U.S.-Mexico relations and regional stability. The transcript draws a provocative comparison to the Cuban Missile Crisis, speculating on scenarios where Chinese or Russian military influence extends to the U.S. border. While such outcomes may be unlikely, they underscore the strategic stakes involved in BRICS expansion. The role of commodities and blockchain. A recurring theme in the discussion is the emphasis on commodities as a foundation for the emerging BRICS-led system. By leveraging tangible assets like gold and oil, BRICS nations aim to establish a currency with intrinsic value, contrasting sharply with the debt-driven model of the West. The integration of blockchain technology to ensure transparency and verifiability further enhances the credibility of this approach. A new era of cooperation? The growing alignment among BRICS nations is not merely a rejection of Western hegemony. It is a vision for a new global order based on mutual benefit and shared prosperity. Initiatives like the Chinese-mediated rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia illustrate the potential for economic collaboration to transcend historical animosities. However, this transition is not without challenges. The consolidation of power within BRICS and its allies requires overcoming internal divisions and ensuring that smaller member states have an equitable voice. Furthermore, the West's response to these developments, whether through adaptation or confrontation, will shape the trajectory of this shift. As the BRICS alliance gains momentum, the world edges closer to a multipolar reality. For the West, this is a moment of reckoning. The era of unchallenged dominance is over, and adapting to this new paradigm will require humility, innovation, and genuine engagement with the global South. For individuals and businesses, diversification, not only of investments, but also of perspectives, will be essential in navigating the complexities of this changing world. In the words of the transcript's speaker, "If you're not a contrarian, you're going to be a victim. The challenge now is to anticipate the ripple effects of these seismic shifts and prepare for a future where cooperation, rather than coercion, defines the global order. Navigating the new trade battlefield, U.S.-China relations escalate. In a move that could redefine global trade dynamics, China has enacted strict export controls targeting key minerals like gallium and germanium. These materials, critical for semiconductors and defense technologies, are vital to U.S. industries. Beijing's policies go beyond borders, with foreign entities using Chinese components now facing legal repercussions under Chinese law. This marks a significant counteraction to the U.S. sanctions and export restrictions aimed at curbing China's technological and military advancements. Tariff wars and supply chain shockwaves. Former President Trump initiated tariffs as high as 45 to 60% on Chinese imports, sparking retaliatory measures from Beijing. These economic policies disrupted supply chains and drove up costs across industries. China's current mineral export bans further amplify these tensions, forcing companies to scramble for alternatives and driving prices sky high. For instance, antimony prices have surged to over $225,000 per ton in 2024. Strategic shifts, Russia and beyond. As the trade war intensifies, China is deepening ties with Russia to counter U.S. pressure. This partnership ensures a steady flow of vital resources like oil and metals, while reducing reliance on American markets. Joint projects, including the Power of Siberia pipeline and Arctic shipping routes, strengthen China's economic resilience. Tech and trade rivalry. The U.S. justifies its export controls by citing national security concerns, restricting China's access to advanced semiconductor technologies. Meanwhile, China mirrors these strategies with its extraterritorial policies, targeting entities globally and enforcing compliance under Chinese law. This tit-for-tat strategy adds complexity to international trade, with companies navigating unprecedented regulatory challenges. The road ahead. While both nations remain economically intertwined, their growing rivalry shapes a precarious future. China's strategic alignment with Russia and its assertive policies signal a shift in global economic power. As these dynamics unfold, the world watches a high-stakes game that could redefine international trade for decades. Reflections on investing and long-term market shifts. When considering entering the stock market, especially for newcomers, it's crucial to reflect on the broader trends and dynamics before engaging in frequent trades. On March 31st, a list of the 20 largest companies by market value showed the dominance of giants like Apple and Saudi Aramco. Notably, 5 of the 6 largest companies were American, a testament to the nation's economic prowess over the centuries. This is especially impressive given that in 1790, the U.S. comprised only 0.5% of the global population. However, history demonstrates the volatility and unpredictability of markets. Looking back to 1989, none of the top 20 companies from that era remain on the current list. Companies such as General Electric and IBM, once titans, have been displaced over time. The rise and fall of these firms highlight the transformative power of innovation and global economic shifts. An illustrative example comes from the auto industry. In 1903, as Henry Ford launched the Ford Motor Company, thousands of other firms entered the automotive market. Yet, by 2009, only 3 major U.S. automakers remained, 2 of which underwent bankruptcy. This underscores a critical lesson for investors. While identifying promising industries is essential, picking specific long-term winners is far more challenging. For individuals aiming to grow their wealth substantially, renowned investor Warren Buffett offers timeless advice. He emphasizes the importance of deep knowledge and passion for the field. Whether poring over Moody's manuals or delving into niche opportunities, Success often comes from a profound understanding of undervalued assets. For most investors, however, a more practical approach lies in diversification. Buffett has long advocated for S&P 500 index funds as a reliable vehicle for sustained growth. For those seeking a balanced strategy, index funds represent a way to benefit from the overall market's trajectory without the risks associated with speculative investments. The future remains unpredictable, and while the current leaders may seem invincible, history tells us that dramatic shifts are inevitable. Thus, investing wisely, with a mix of diversification and diligent research, remains the key to long-term success. China's transformative rise. A global economic powerhouse. China's meteoric rise is reshaping the global landscape, marking a profound economic and political shift that demands balanced and insightful attention. Over the past 7 decades, the nation has accomplished what is arguably the most significant economic transformation in human history, lifting over 1 billion people out of poverty and establishing itself as a modern economic power. Unprecedented economic growth. China's journey from abject poverty to economic dynamism is unparalleled. In just 70 years, it has transitioned from a primarily agrarian economy into the world's manufacturing hub. Its GDP growth has outpaced every other nation, solidifying its position as the second-largest economy and a major force in global trade. By comparison, similar industrial transformations in Europe and the United States took centuries. China's ability to quadruple real wages over 4 decades starkly contrasts with the modest 10 to 20% increase experienced in the United States during the same period. Unique economic model. China's economic strategy defies conventional categorizations. Combining socialist principles with market dynamics, its system is approximately evenly split between state-owned enterprises and private capitalist ventures. This hybrid model has allowed it to achieve rapid industrialization and urbanization without succumbing to the pitfalls of either pure capitalism or socialism. Global influence and competition. China's technological advancements and industrial dominance have sparked a new era of competition with Western nations, particularly the United States. Industries such as electric vehicles and semiconductors exemplify China's growing prowess, compelling countries like the US to respond with protective tariffs and strategic investments. Unlike the Cold War rivalry between the US and the Soviet Union, China's integration into the global economy adds complexity to this competition. Its collaborative yet competitive relationship with capitalist markets has reshaped global trade dynamics. Historical perspective. China's modern resurgence is deeply rooted in its historical experience, including the Century of Humiliation from 1850 to 1950. The nation's leadership, led by figures like Xi Jinping, sees economic and political achievements as a means to restore China's global stature and prevent future exploitation. A vision for the future. As China looks ahead, 2 potential futures emerge. One path mirrors historical empires, with China potentially becoming the world's dominant power. The other envisions a collaborative global framework as embodied by initiatives like BRICS that rejects the traditional model of imperial hegemony in favor of shared leadership. Implications for the world. China's trajectory presents both challenges and opportunities for the international community. Its rise underscores the importance of understanding its unique system and ambitions without resorting to reductive or adversarial narratives. Whether as a global hegemon or a key player in a collective international order, China's role in shaping the 21st century is indisputable. The end of an era, America's decline, and the rise of a new global order. The United States stands at a crossroads in its history, a moment marked by profound economic and geopolitical transitions. The once unchallenged global dominance of the American empire is waning, giving rise to a multipolar world where other nations particularly China and the BRICS bloc, assert their influence. For over half a century, the global economy has operated under the principles of neoliberal globalization, a model that emphasized deregulation, privatization, and open markets. Pioneered in the Reagan-Thatcher era, this approach dismantled many of the safeguards and social programs introduced during the New Deal. Government interventions that once cushioned capitalism's harsh edges were rolled back, paving the way for an era of unbridled corporate power and increasing economic disparity. During the mid-20th century, the United States emerged from World War II as the world's uncontested economic powerhouse. With Europe and Japan devastated, American industries thrived, and policies like Social Security and a robust minimum wage improved living standards for millions. However, since the 1970s, U.S. leadership has shifted its focus. Corporations moved operations overseas to capitalize on cheap labor, particularly in China, which offered not only low wages, but also an expanding consumer market. This exodus hollowed out American manufacturing, leaving behind economic stagnation and job losses that disproportionately affected the middle and working classes. Meanwhile, China's hybrid economic model, a blend of capitalism and state control, has delivered unprecedented growth. For the past 3 decades, its GDP has consistently grown at rates between 6% and 9%, outpacing the United States' modest 2% to 3%. This rapid development has propelled China into the position of a formidable global competitor. Simultaneously, the BRICS alliance, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, has expanded its influence, now representing more than half the world's population and surpassing the combined economic output of the G7 nations. Despite these shifts, the U.S. political and economic establishment remains in denial. Politicians and media often cling to outdated narratives, portraying America as an unrivaled global leader. This refusal to acknowledge reality has consequences. For instance, the war in Ukraine, initially framed as a strategy to weaken Russia, has instead highlighted the strength of alliances outside the Western sphere. Russia's economic ties with China and India have cushioned its economy, leaving the West's sanctions less effective than anticipated. Domestically, the costs of maintaining an unsustainable global position are being offloaded onto ordinary Americans. Inflation, stagnant wages, and an unadjusted federal minimum wage of $7.25 since 2009 have eroded living standards. While corporate profits soar, the middle and lower classes bear the brunt of economic hardship. These disparities have fueled political polarization, creating fertile ground for populist figures who promise protection but often deliver empty rhetoric. The decline of American dominance is not unprecedented. Empires throughout history, from the British to the Roman, have risen and fallen, often resisting their diminished status until the very end. What sets this moment apart is the urgency for a reckoning. Denial of these realities risks further entrenching inequality and exacerbating global tensions. To move forward, the United States must confront these changes with honesty and pragmatism. This means reimagining its role in a multipolar world, investing in domestic infrastructure and education, and addressing the root causes of inequality. It also requires a foreign policy that prioritizes cooperation over confrontation, recognizing that collaboration with emerging powers like China and India is essential for addressing global challenges such as climate change and economic stability. The American empire as we knew it may be over, but this need not spell decline for the American people. By embracing change and adapting to a new global order, the United States has the opportunity to redefine its role and ensure a prosperous future for its citizens. The alternative, continued denial and inaction, will only deepen the challenges ahead. Trade wars, from historical lessons to modern implications. The U.S.-China tech showdown. The United States has tightened its grip on critical technology exports, particularly in the semiconductor and AI sectors, aiming to curb China's technological ascent. Measures include blacklisting firms like Huawei, broadening foreign direct product rules, and restricting advanced semiconductor tools. These moves, designed to protect national security, have intensified trade friction with Beijing. China retaliated by banning exports of key materials vital for high-tech and defense industries, escalating a conflict that mirrors a history of economic confrontations. Lessons from the past trade wars are far from new. The Opium Wars of the 19th century highlighted how economic imbalances, like Britain's trade deficit with China, can spark conflict. Britain's opium exports to China led to widespread addiction and social decay, prompting the Qing dynasty to ban the trade. Britain's military superiority ensured victory, forcing China into unequal treaties that ceded territory and sovereignty. These events marked the start of China's century of humiliation. Fast forward to the 1930s, the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act aimed to shield American businesses during the Great Depression by imposing record-high tariffs on over 20,000 goods. Instead, it triggered global retaliation, slashing international trade by 65% and worsening the economic downturn. More recently, the 1960s chicken war between the US and Europe saw tariffs on poultry and light trucks, reshaping industries and prompting foreign automakers to establish US manufacturing plants to bypass trade barriers. US-China trade war, a new chapter. The US-China trade war, initiated during President Trump's tenure, saw tariffs imposed on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of goods. This conflict disrupted global markets and escalated tensions over issues like intellectual property theft and forced technology transfers. The Trump administration's tariffs targeted $550 billion in Chinese imports, while China's retaliatory measures struck $185 billion in U.S. exports. American farmers were among the hardest hit, particularly soybean producers, as China turned to alternative suppliers. U.S. businesses reliant on Chinese imports faced higher costs, with consumers ultimately bearing the burden. The Federal Reserve estimated the tariffs cost the average American household $831 annually. Despite the 2020 Phase 1 trade agreement, which aimed to address some of these issues, significant challenges remain unresolved. Strategic decoupling and global implications. The U.S. and China are increasingly prioritizing self-reliance. China's state-led investments in semiconductors, AI, and telecommunications have advanced its domestic capabilities, while the U.S. seeks to bolster its manufacturing of strategic goods. This economic decoupling has accelerated shifts in global supply chains, with companies diversifying to countries like Vietnam, India, and Mexico. Adding fuel to the fire, China recently banned exports of critical rare earth elements essential for U.S. industries like aerospace and renewable energy. This strategic move underscores Beijing's leverage in the global supply chain and highlights the risks of over-reliance on single suppliers. The rise of economic blocs. Meanwhile, the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, are challenging the U.S.-led global financial system. China's push to internationalize its currency, the yuan, and Russia's dollarization efforts reflect a broader desire to diminish reliance on the U.S. dollar. Initiatives like the New Development Bank and bilateral trade agreements in local currencies aim to reshape global economic dynamics. What's next? As trade conflicts evolve, the stakes remain high. The U.S.-China economic confrontation reflects deeper strategic tensions, with implications for global supply chains, technological innovation, and geopolitical alliances. Lessons from past trade wars underline the risks of protectionist policies and the potential for unintended economic fallout. Moving forward, balanced diplomacy and diversified trade strategies will be critical to mitigating these risks and fostering global stability. Global economy at a crossroads. The forces reshaping the world. The global economic landscape is undergoing a seismic shift, with traditional powers waning and emerging players rising to the forefront. Here are the key factors driving these changes and their potential implications. The rise of global capitalism. Following World War II, Western capitalism ushered in a period of unprecedented growth. However, by the 1970s, this growth began to slow, leading to a dramatic shift in focus. Companies sought cheaper labor, weaker environmental regulations, and larger markets abroad, paving the way for globalization. This transformation created economic booms in nations like China, India, and Brazil. However, it also hollowed out the industrial base in Western countries. High-paying unionized jobs were replaced by lower-wage positions, leading to rising inequality and economic discontent in countries like the United States and across Europe. A turn toward economic nationalism. The era of unbridled globalization is giving way to economic nationalism. Nations are increasingly prioritizing domestic interests over global cooperation. The United States has implemented protectionist policies, including trade restrictions targeting China, signaling a shift away from global integration. European countries face a difficult choice: align with the US or build stronger ties with emerging economies in Asia and the global South. These moves have heightened global tensions as countries compete for economic and political dominance in an increasingly fragmented world. The decline of the American empire. Signs of the US's declining global influence are becoming more apparent. In recent months, nations like Honduras have shifted their diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to China, further solidifying China's role as a dominant global power. China has also brokered historic peace agreements, including a rapprochement between long-standing rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran, a move that showcased Beijing's growing geopolitical clout. Meanwhile, the U.S. struggles to maintain its global leadership amid rising challenges, from trade disputes to the ongoing war in Ukraine, where Western efforts have faced significant obstacles against a resilient Russia. What lies ahead? The question now is whether China will replace the United States as the dominant global superpower, or whether the world will move toward a multipolar structure, with power shared among various nations. At the heart of this shift is a reconfiguration of global economic systems, with hybrid models of state and private capitalism becoming more prevalent. The coming decades will likely be defined by how nations adapt to these changes and the role of a growing, increasingly mobilized global working class in shaping the future. As the world navigates this transformative era, the stakes couldn't be higher. How countries respond to these challenges will determine the direction of the global economy and the lives of billions. How empires fall and why the U.S. might be next. Every empire, no matter its strength or duration, eventually collapses. The Romans reigned for over a millennium. The Ottomans dominated continents, and the USSR reshaped the modern political landscape. Today, questions arise about the empire we currently inhabit, America. Is it crumbling? And if so, how quickly? The United States has achieved unprecedented power and influence, yet signs of decline are evident. From economic inequality to political instability, parallels with fallen empires are striking. Three critical symptoms: economic disparity, declining soft power, and overextended hard power signal that the American empire may be faltering. Economic inequality. The internal decay history teaches us that internal decay often precedes an empire's fall. Ancient Rome, for instance, was marked by a chasm between the elite and common citizens. While the wealthy lived in opulence, the majority endured poverty, working menial jobs, and surviving on meager resources. Bread and circuses temporarily pacified the masses, but they couldn't prevent Rome's decline. The United States mirrors this trajectory. Once, the American dream symbolized homeownership, upward mobility, and a high quality of life. Today, for many, it is out of reach. Wages stagnate while living costs soar. Homelessness rises, infrastructure crumbles, and access to healthcare and education becomes increasingly elusive. Meanwhile, wealth accumulates at the top, with billionaires amassing unprecedented fortunes. This stark economic divide fuels resentment and instability, much like in Rome. The erosion of soft power empires rely on soft power to maintain influence. The Ottoman Empire, at its height, achieved this through diplomacy and cultural cohesion. However, as nationalism grew within its territories, the Ottomans lost their ability to unify diverse populations, hastening their decline. America, too, was once a beacon of democracy, economic opportunity, and cultural influence. Following World War II, it positioned itself as a global leader, exporting its ideals and pop culture. But credibility is the bedrock of soft power, and America's inconsistencies, domestically and abroad, have eroded its moral authority. Human rights violations, environmental damage, and military interventions undermine the values it claims to champion, leading to growing global disillusionment. The burden of hard power. The USSR demonstrated the unsustainable cost of maintaining an empire through sheer military might. Its overextension, from the arms race to the war in Afghanistan, drained its economy and morale, eventually leading to its collapse. Similarly, the United States invests heavily in military operations, with over 700 bases worldwide and annual defense spending exceeding that of the next 10 countries combined. Decades of costly wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have yielded instability rather than victories. Ideological conflicts, such as the War on Terror and Cold War rivalries, further strain resources and public support. A world in transition. The decline of the American empire unfolds amid a broader geopolitical shift. As the world becomes increasingly multipolar, emerging alliances and new frameworks challenge America's dominance. The reliance on the US dollar, global institutions, and economic systems designed to benefit America is waning. Countries seek alternatives, signaling a departure from a US-centric global order. Empires rise and fall, often leaving legacies of innovation and influence. Yet, their collapse is inevitable when internal decay, external resistance, and unsustainable practices converge. As the American empire navigates these challenges, the question remains: will it adapt and endure, or succumb to the forces of history? The bus stops here. Signs of a changing American empire. Empires rise and fall. This historical truth looms over our modern world, where economic powerhouses and global dominances shift in real time. The United States, long seen as a linchpin of global stability and economic leadership, now faces an uncomfortable reality. Its position is eroding, evidenced by subtle yet poignant indicators woven into the fabric of daily life. One telling example lies in the declining infrastructure of inner-city bus travel. With over 60 million Americans, predominantly lower-income individuals, relying on this affordable mode of transportation annually, the closure of bus stations across the country is more than a logistical inconvenience. It's emblematic of a deeper economic prioritization. Profit-seeking investors repurpose these stations for high-end developments, displacing those who depend on them. The absence of basic amenities like waiting rooms and benches for bus riders speaks volumes about the neglect of the working class in favor of the affluent. But this is not merely about buses. It's a microcosm of an economy recalibrating its focus away from serving the many to catering to the few. This transition hints at a broader story, a declining ability to generate wealth at home, forcing shifts in how resources are distributed and who they ultimately serve. Global power plays, Ukraine, sanctions, and economic reordering. Geopolitically, the United States' involvement in Ukraine illustrates miscalculations that arise from a refusal to acknowledge its diminishing influence. The expectation that sanctions would cripple Russia economically was met with an unexpected outcome. Instead, Russia redirected its economic partnerships, with countries like China and India stepping in as key buyers of its energy exports. As a result, the world's economic center of gravity continues its eastward shift. This reordering is underscored by the rise of China and the BRICS bloc: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and new members like Saudi Arabia. With a combined economic output surpassing that of the G7, BRICS exemplifies the diversification of global economic power, a stark contrast to the unipolar dominance once enjoyed by the U.S. costs of empire. Lessons from Britain. The United Kingdom, a former global superpower, provides a cautionary tale. Decades of economic decline have culminated in public sector strikes and systemic underfunding. Its National Health Service, once a source of national pride, struggles to meet basic demands amidst inflation and wage stagnation. Strikes by junior doctors reflect deeper fractures in the system. As Britain confronts its post-imperial status, the parallels with an America on a similar trajectory become harder to ignore. The New World Order. These shifts are not occurring in isolation. Countries once tethered to U.S. dominance now explore new alliances. Even long-standing allies, such as Saudi Arabia, are joining alternative economic frameworks. Meanwhile, China's ascent as a technological and industrial leader challenges American preeminence in critical sectors, from automobile manufacturing to aerospace. For the United States, the path forward lies in recognizing these realities. Clinging to past glories or overestimating its influence risks deepening strategic missteps. Instead, adapting to a multipolar world where economic, political, and cultural power is distributed more equitably offers a more sustainable route. The decline of an empire is never painless. It reshapes societies, economies, and geopolitics in ways that are often resisted until undeniable. As the signs grow clearer, the question remains: will the United States navigate this transition with foresight, or will it falter under the weight of denial?